My name is Cathy Ndreca, and my presentation is entitled, Does Exposure to Media Violence Increase an Individual's Likelihood of Engaging in Violent Behaviour? This presentation covers the rationale, aim and hypothesis of the research article, the participants, method and findings, the conclusions, implications and limitations of the study, and a brief conclusion. The research article is number 2 from my article matrix being Ybarra, Dina West, Marco, Leaf, Hamburger and Boxer 2008, Linkages between Internet and Other Media Violence with Seriously Violent Behaviour by Youth. From the American Journal, Pediatrics, Issue 122, Volume 5. In the US, youth violence is a significant public health issue, with estimated costs of over $158 billion per annum. Research indicates that exposure to media violence is not the single reason for youth violence, but is the single most easily remediable contributing factor. I searched the ABS for Australian information about teens committing violent crimes, and note no official statistics are kept about the cause of crimes perpetrated by young Australians. I also looked at an Australian study conducted by Tumburu and others in 2013 covering youth violence in Australia. There was no suggestion that media violence was a leading cause of violent behaviour in Australian youth. In Ybarra et al. Study, a key term used is seriously violent behaviour, which the researchers defined as committing shooting or stabbing, aggravated assault, robbery or sexual assault. The rationale was to increase knowledge about youth violence by posing the question, is exposure to violence online similar to exposure to other violent media? Their aim was to examine if a link between viewing violent media and aggressive or seriously violent behaviour in teens exists. Consequently, the hypothesis was teens who view media violence are more likely to display seriously violent behaviour. There were 1,588 participants aged between 10 and 15 years, all in the US. Participants were required to be able to read English and have used the internet in the past 6 months. The researchers used a national Harris Poll online survey called Growing Up with Media, conducted in August and September 2006. A sample was obtained via an opt-in panel. Households were enrolled using a stratified random sample based on age and gender. Youth respondents were recruited and researchers obtained consent from an appropriate adult. The youth respondent then completed a 21-minute survey. The response rate was calculated as the number of individuals starting the survey divided by the net number of email invites. The overall response rate was 26%. The main measure was self-reporting on whether the respondent had committed seriously violent behaviour. Respondents were asked if they had viewed violent websites in the past year. Their response options were on a 4-point like-it scale, with 1 being almost none of them, to 4 being almost all of them. Background variables such as race, ethnicity, internet use, substance use, demographics, felony convictions for adults in the household, academic performance, and the number of close friends who'd been arrested were some of the aspects investigated. Data was weighted to reflect the population of adults with children aged 10 to 15 years in the US. Propensity weighting was used to adjust for an adult respondent's propensity to be online. Valid data was required for 80% of the variables examined, and as a result, 3 households were dropped. The primary technique for quantifying associations was logistic regression. There were 19 findings. Key findings were: exposure of youth to media violence was a significant predictor of seriously violent behaviour. Reducing youth exposure to violent media is important to violence prevention. A response of many, most or all of the websites visited depicted violence meant 5 times greater likelihood of reporting seriously violent behaviour compared to a response of the website did not show people engaged in violence. Exposure to real violence on the internet may be more immersive or interactive than other types of violent exposure. This raised the question, are youths visiting violent websites more likely to undertake seriously violent behaviour, or are youths who manifest seriously violent behaviour more likely to visit violent websites, or is the relationship bidirectional? As the number of violent websites visited increased, the odds of reporting seriously violent behaviour increased by 50%. Efforts to prevent exposing young people to violent websites seems warranted. Large proportions of youths had not heard of these violent websites. 13 conclusions and implications were drawn from the research. Key ones include viewing media violence is associated with self-reports of seriously violent behaviour. For some children, viewing media violence increases aggressive behaviour. This may also apply to seriously violent behaviour. The internet is important to teens for social aspects and self-expression, and therefore balance is needed in addressing the issues. Inform and empower parents to reduce youth exposure to online violence by installing blocking or filtering software. Preventions for youth violence should address a range of influences. There are a number of limitations for the study. Firstly, there was a relatively small sample size. The research did not enable causation to be determined, and prior research suggested younger children may be affected when exposed to violent media, so the reported behaviour may be from viewing violent media at a younger age. As a self-reporting survey, under or over-reporting behaviour was possible. And the psychological impact of viewing violence online and the relationship with other symptoms or disorders was not investigated. My conclusions: this research adds weight that media violence exposure increases aggressive behaviour. Prevention and intervention measures should address a range of influences. Longitudinal research is needed to confirm the research already undertaken. And finally, research needs to be conducted with young Australians to determine applicability for Australia. Thank you for your time and attention.